Okay, cool. You ready? All right. My father was a very healthy person. He ate healthy, he exercised, he never smoked a day in his life. And when he turned 60, he was diagnosed with advanced stage lung cancer and told that he had a year and a half to live. Because he was so healthy, he managed to survive chemo for 3 years. He worked the whole time, he never complained, it was amazing. So one day my dad goes to the doctor and the doctor says that there's a clinical trial for a new miracle drug for lung cancer patients. And this drug is so crazily effective that in some people, they see a shrinkage of their cancer the very next day after taking the drug. The only catch is that the drug is only effective in less than 2% of the population that have this really rare genetic mutation. But if you are one of those 2%, the drug can save your life. The clinic where the trial was being held was about a 6-hour drive from where my parents lived, and my father wasn't in great shape to travel. But they made the trip, and he went through 2 days of intensive testing to see if he had the genetic mutation. And after he did the tests, they came back home and waited for a month for the results. I'm going to pause here for just a second, okay? After he did the tests, they came back home and waited for a month for the results. And they were kind of worried the whole time that even if the results came back positive and my father was eligible, that he'd be too sick to make the trip back for the clinical trial. But finally the phone call came, and unbelievably my dad was one of the 2%. He had the genetic mutation, and he was just well enough to travel. So my parents made the trip back to the clinic, and when they got there, the nurse looked really upset. She said, "I'm sorry, but there's been a mistake." And my parents started freaking out, and she said, no, you have the genetic mutation. You're totally eligible for the trial. The only problem is that one of the blood samples we took was too small. So unless we retake the sample and wait another month for the results, we're not going to be able to use your results in the trial and therefore cannot release the medication. My parents asked to speak to the doctor, and they explained to him that they couldn't wait a month because my father probably wouldn't live that long. So could he please just give them the medication to save my father's life? The doctor felt really bad and said, "I wish I could, but I'd lose my license. But what I can do is try to put a rush on the blood sample, and hopefully it'll come back sooner than a month, and you'll be able to take the medication." So my parents checked into a hotel and waited. And while they were there, my father's condition continued to decline to the point where he couldn't breathe at all lying on his back, not even with the oxygen tank. So he would sit awake all night, struggling to breathe, and eventually it got so bad that he had to go to the hospital and get a tube put down his throat so that he could breathe. And that was the day that I showed up. My family was exhausted, so I took over for them at the hospital, and I remember my father was communicating by writing on a pad. And we worked out this system of hand signals that he would use to communicate with me so that I could tell the nurses what he wanted. That night, I was sleeping on a cot in his hospital room, and suddenly all the alarms started going off. The lights came on, the nurses came running into the room, and I got up and I saw my father sitting upright in the bed. His arms were tied to the bed, and he just had this look on his face of such terror. Like, I have never seen a more horrible expression. It reminded me of something out of one of those Renaissance paintings of hell. And he was just freaking out, and he was doing everything in his power to get that tube out of his throat, and it took 3 nurses and me to restrain him so they could sedate him again. After that happened, I turned to the nurses and said, "What the hell was that?" My father was the calmest person. He would just never do that. And the nurses explained to me that sometimes when you give patients sedation, when they wake up, they have no idea who they are or where they are. All they know is that they're strapped to a scary bed with this horrible thing down their throat, and they panic. And she said, "Don't worry, it's totally normal." So this happened like 5 or 6 times over the course of the night, and I was just getting so mad at the nurses. I was like, just give him enough sedation so he doesn't wake up and it doesn't keep happening to him. I felt terrible and said, "We wish we could, but if we give him that much, we'll kill him. We're trying to do this very delicate balancing act." And then an even more horrible thought occurred to me, which was, what if it's not even the case and he doesn't know who he is? What if he is conscious and he's trying desperately to communicate something, and that's why he wants the tube out of his throat? So I told this to the nurses, and they said, even if that's the case, if we take the tube out, he'll die. So there's really nothing we can do. And this kept going on all night. The next morning, the blood sample came back confirmed my father was eligible for the trial. And that afternoon, he died. After this happened, I was so enraged at just the perversity of that sequence of events. And my father was such a good person, and for him to die that way and for me to see it, I just couldn't get over it. And I wasn't eating, and I couldn't sleep at all. did manage to fall asleep, I would have horrible nightmares and wake up with this feeling of dread that I was going to die exactly the way my father did. And if anyone tried to help me, I would just get angrier and angrier, and nobody could do anything. Until I got a letter from my friend Beth. But before I tell you what Beth's letter said, I have to tell you a little bit about Beth. When my friend Beth was about to turn 40, she had been married for 12 years to a really charming and successful guy, and they had 2 beautiful children, ages 3 and 6. And they were all in the car on their way back from a weekend family outing. My friend Beth was driving, her husband was in the passenger seat, and the 2 kids were in the back. And Beth's husband's cell phone was on the divider between them. The phone rang, and Beth looked down and saw that it was one of his coworkers, Anita, and he rejected the call. And Beth asked, "Oh, why didn't you take that call from Anita? If she's calling you on the weekend, it must be something important about work." And he just gave her some answer that didn't make any sense at all. And Beth thought that was strange, and it sort of continued to bother her all day. And that night, she was lying awake at 2 in the morning, and it was still bothering her, this phone call. So she wakes up her husband and says, "Look, I know something is weird with that phone call today. You tell me right now what it is." And he gets up and he says, "Okay, I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this. I guess now is the time." Basically, for the last 12 years of their marriage, plus the 4 years they'd been dating before that, this man had been sleeping with strippers, prostitutes, random women he'd picked up in bars. He said it was like over 100 women. And the first words that came out of Beth's mouth were, "Did you use condoms?" And he said, "Not usually. But you were always the one who I loved. Those other women were just sex. I always loved you." Until Anita, this woman from work. They'd been seeing each other for the past 6 months, and they were in love, and now Anita wanted to have a baby. So Beth's husband was going to leave my friend Beth and their kids for this woman, Anita. Obviously, it's the night from hell. My friend Beth doesn't get any sleep, and the next morning, she's in the shower, and in a total freak accident, she somehow manages to slip and fall, and in the process of falling, claws out her own cornea. True story. So after this happened, I was one of the people who helped Beth through the trauma of that experience, and since then, she had moved across the country. And when she heard about what had happened to my father, she wrote me a letter. And this is what the letter said. "It's horrible what happened, and I'm sorry that you're suffering. You probably won't feel better for a while. Don't worry, I won't tell you to get on with your life, and I promise I won't try to make you smile. I don't know what you're going through, but I know what it's like to want to die when life insists on going on. That's when I sing a little song, and it makes me feel better, just a little, not a lot. Who do you think you are to be immune from tragedy? What makes you special, that you should go unscathed? It's horrible what happened, and I'm sorry that your mind is filled with all these agonizing memories. I regret that I can't help with words of comfort or reassuring expertise, but I know what it's like to cry. How could this have happened? Why on earth should I be cursed?" That's when I sing a little song. It makes me feel a little better, just a little, not a lot. Who do you think you are to be immune from tragedy? What makes you special, that you should go unscathed? Horrible things happen all the time. So after I read Beth's letter, I asked myself, okay, so who do you think you are? And the answer was, I think I'm special. I believe deep down with all my heart that I deserve to be immune, not only from loneliness and tragedy, but also from aging, sickness, and death. But I'm not special. I'm a person. And when you're a person, all kinds of really terrible things happen to you. That's why my father died the way he did, and if I die the same way, it'll be for the same reason, because I'm a person. Just like my father, just like everyone. And again, it wasn't some big, profound revelation, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a very little bit of comfort. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you, Tony. Bye.